Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. As a Category 5 hurricane, Ian was the strongest hurricane to make landfall in Florida since Hurricane Michael in 2018. It peaked as a Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds of 160 miles per hour early on September 28, 2022, while heading towards the west coast of Florida. Ian made landfall just below peak intensity in southwest Florida. Ian caused 161 fatalities, 5 in Cuba, 150 in Florida, 5 in North Carolina, and 1 in Virginia. Ian caused catastrophic damage with losses estimated at $113 billion. Much of the damage was due to the 10 to 15-foot storm surge. The cities of Fort Myers, Cape Coral, and Naples were particularly hard hit, leaving millions without power in the storm's wake and numerous people forced to take refuge on their roofs. Sanibel Island, Fort Myers Beach, and Pine Island all bore the brunt of Ian's powerful winds and its accompanying storm surge at landfall, which leveled nearly all standing structures and collapsed the Sanibel Causeway and the Matlacha Bridge to Pine Island that left people trapped on those islands for several days. I'm joined today by my partner, Joe Adams, who rode out Hurricane Ian in his home on Fort Myers Beach. Over the last 35 years, Joe has provided legal counsel to over 1,000 community associations, primarily in Southwest Florida. Joe is a board-certified specialist in condominium and planned development law and has been recognized over the years as one of the best lawyers in America, a legal elite, and one of Florida's super lawyers, among other notable honors. Joe has dedicated years of service to the Florida Bar and is a prolific writer, commentator, and speaker regarding community association law. He has authored a popular weekly newspaper column on community association law since 1996. And I'm delighted to have him on the podcast today. So, Joe, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you for having me.
So, Joe, we're taping this episode at the end of May, and it's likely going to be released in late June after Florida's 6-month hurricane season's underway. You know, you and I have talked along with our colleagues for years about what our community associations can do to prepare for and recover from hurricanes. But with Ian, I know you and our West Coast partners gained a whole new perspective of what it means to be in the eye of a storm. I remember seeing pictures of the flooding in your house and your car as the waters were rising, and it was unfolding in real time. I mean, I know I was scared watching it from the safety of the East Coast in Fort Lauderdale. I can't imagine what you and your family went through, riding it out.
Yes, it was really a surreal experience, Donna. I have lived in Southwest Florida since 1985, so almost 40 years. And I've been with Becker for my 37th year. So I have a number of different perspectives on this. From the perspective of the citizenry and my personal experience, I think a number of factors came into play. For what it's worth, both Hurricane Charlie and Hurricane Ian made landfall, within miles of where I lived as well. And they were both significant storms, Charlie in 2004 and Irma in 2017. And I evacuated my home for both of those storms. Hurricane Ian was, what I like to say is, Charlie plus Irma times 10. And it was literally biblical. Why didn't I evacuate? Several things. Number one, as you will probably recall, everybody watches the spaghetti lines in the Weather Channel religiously during these, and it was predicted to hit in Tampa. I mean, that was where all of the models had it going. And, obviously those models, changed. Charlie actually took a hard right turn also. It was supposed to hit quite a bit further north. But I don't think anybody really expected it to change as it did, and why it did. I don't know all the meteorological reasons for it. I'm sure they exist. But it took a hard right, and then it was clear it was bearing down on Fort Myers. And at that point, we had about 24 to 36 hours. And, you have to kind of put this in the context of, what are your options? Because Southwest Florida has grown exponentially in population over the past couple of decades. So there's a lot of people here who have never been through a storm. And, a lot of people get, very nervous, rightfully so in this case, and even panicky. So, getting out on the roads is no guarantee that you're going to be safe. The roads get clogged up. And if you don't know where it's going to hit, I had friends in Sarasota during Charlie. They vacated Sarasota, went to Orlando. Charlie missed Sarasota and hit their hotel in Orlando. So we just made a decision to kind of, hunker down. And, to be honest, Category 4 approaching 5 hurricane is bad, but most of the newer homes, including mine, are, designed to withstand that. I have hurricane glass and, well-built home, and I really wasn't, I won't say I wasn't worried about it, but I didn't really fear for my life safety.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Joe, about your home. So I'm assuming impact glass, generator, perhaps, well-stocked. I've been to your house for a party. I know you have a lot of provisions in your house. So roof, newer roof. You felt that you had a pretty sturdy place to ride out the storm.
And what we didn't really anticipate was the storm surge. They've always said that's a thing. And I remember after Hurricane Irma, they said, well, there's going to be storm surge. The particular area where I live on Fort Myers Beach, they had these maps. They predicted we're going to get 20 feet of storm surge. Okay, that's like catastrophic. And we had 3 inches of water in my street. So I think to some degree it was kind of the Chicken Little thing, because, you hear this and you say, okay, they're trying to sell commercials on the Weather Channel or covering themselves or whatever. And, sure enough, the wind started coming and we knew it was coming. And all of a sudden I looked out in my yard, and I live on a canal, and the water was over the seawall. And that happens at high tides and whatever. And then the water's in my swimming pool. And then the water's 3 inches up the sliding glass door at the first level of my house. And it was coming, really fast. And between about 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., it crested to about 7 feet in my house.
7 feet?
In my house, yeah. The water outside, because, we had doors and windows that kind of kept some of it out. So we were like in a fish aquarium to some degree. And we came to the upper floor. But
you have a 3-story house, right, Joe?
Yes. But you mentioned the deaths, and when I first moved to Florida, I lived in what they call a Michigan home. Michigan Homes was a builder in Southwest Florida that did big subdevelopment tracts, and they were all block and stucco, 8-foot ceilings, very well-built homes circa the 1970s. And, there's a lot of those still around. They're very well-built homes. And in fact, my next door neighbor had one. I took some pictures while this was coming, and he fortunately evacuated his home, but the water basically reached the ceiling of his home. So it was over 8 feet in his home. And you mentioned the deaths. I believe in Fort Myers Beach, at least Lee County, where I live, I think there's about 65 deaths. And I know a couple of people who died. And in almost every case, it was from drowning. And in almost every one of those cases, it was water in ground level homes. Right, it's almost like a horror movie on TV where you're, just watching the water rise in the tank while the, evil guy is laughing. But, that's literally what happened. They drowned in their homes because the water pushed to the ceiling. A lot of people went up into their attics. There's hatches. If the water rises above that, then you're stuck.
Well, you're trapped, right? Because there's no.
Well, yeah. Because
you can't get out onto
some
the
people
roof.
keep axes up in their attic. So it was horrific. It was literally horrific. I recall we didn't have power for a month, but we stayed here. They brought the National Guard in. We were under I don't know what you call it, a quarantine or whatever. Nobody could come in or out. There were guys literally standing there with machine guns and Army stations set up. And then when the remediation company started coming in, they had to be in after daylight and out before dark. And the lines to get out here were like 2.5, 3 hours to get in. So you'd have a guy that have to sit in traffic 3 hours to get to your house, then wouldn't get there till noon because he couldn't get there. And then he had to leave by like 3 or 4 o'clock because he had to sit 3 hours getting out to be in and out before dark. I saw Army helicopters going over with body bags. It was literally like something from a horror movie. I know you've been, to this area. I mean, the Sanibel Causeway was just rebuilt maybe 15 years ago. I mean, it's a very, impressive, sturdy looking structure. And, this storm collapsed it. The wind was bad. I mean, Charlie was kind of like a buzzsaw. It was very compact. It had very intense winds in the middle, like 200-mile-an-hour tornadoes were spinning off in the circle off the eye. It was very small and it moved very fast. It was like a buzzsaw. This storm just came and sat here for 12 hours. I mean, the wind was probably 150 miles an hour from probably 7 in the morning till 7 at night. And first it came from one direction, then as it turned, it went the other direction. And, even my home, which is, built in '04, was, built according to then top of the line hurricane standards. I mean, it got beat up. I mean, a lot of my windows got deflected. My roof has to be replaced. It was certainly not like, a wood frame structure, but yeah, it was one for the ages, I hope. Both of my kids live in what I would call the Michigan homes along the Caloosahatchee River. And the biggest fear I had is my son and his wife live right on the river in a canal, and they have literally a Michigan home with the 8-foot ceilings. And what happened was the water basically empty out of Tampa Bay. It came all up in Estero Bay, where I am, to probably 10 feet, in Sanibel, 10, 12 feet. And then it whooshed out. And what happened in Hurricane Donna in 2000, I think it was in 1962, if I recall, the whole Caloosahatchee River emptied out onto both sides. They were saying that was going to happen here.
Did you lose cell service at all?
We had nothing. And my son had decided to stay in his home, and then he was going to leave, but the water was like a river. And I was just sitting here thinking the water's going to rise in his home up to 8 feet, and he and my daughter-in-law, my newly born grandson, are going to drown in there. And I mean, it was horrific. And I could not establish contact with him until about noon the next day. So, I mean, you worry about your kids more than yourself. And it was a catastrophe. It was an absolute catastrophe.
Joe, it's horrible as you're describing. Let me ask you, it doesn't sound from what you're describing as if there's any safe way to stay in a home if you know there's going to be storm surge, correct? Because, I mean, unless you plan to sit on your roof.
I'm certainly not an expert in that issue. I'm not sure what the safer alternatives were. I mean, I don't know. I assume the hurricane shelters are elevated above storm surge level. I mean, I wouldn't really want anybody listening to this to take, my advice, because I'm dumb, obviously. I didn't leave. But this was what they call a 500-year storm, which actually was explained to me by one of my clients who is a Oxford-educated scientist in meteorology. And he said, that doesn't mean that it only happens once every 500 years. It means that there's a 1 in 500 chance that it will happen any given year. So, I mean, those aren't really great odds, but yeah, I mean, it can happen. And particularly along the coast, both the Atlantic and the Gulf sides get their share of nasty stuff.
Do you want to give a shout out to the people who helped? I know you mentioned it just a few minutes ago that in the immediate aftermath, there were people who came in and tried to help the people trapped. Who came to help?
Initially, it was the government. I mean, it was literally a unsafe disaster zone. I mean, we had the Army, the Coast Guard, and the National Guard, and the Sheriff's Department were really the only people that were permitted to move around those areas. There was some looting, none in my neighborhood that I know of, but I know there was quite a bit on Fort Myers Beach. And they took a very aggressive posture toward that. I saw you loot, we shoot signs everywhere. And, for a couple days, it was just that. there's numerous organizations, then come in. The Red Cross was very
helpful,
much around, out there, and several other groups. I mean, I don't know. I was out in my yard, just shoveling up muck, and every 2 hours, some guy would come by with a pickup truck with its bed full of ice with Gatorades and waters in it, or sandwiches or things. I mean, people are good. I mean, I don't know what organizations they're all with, but they came to help. And it's really interesting. I saw this after other storms. I mean, there's literally a industry of storm chasers who basically are sitting somewhere in Texas or Louisiana or wherever they are, and they're on call. And once they find out where these big storms hit, I mean, they come in literally by the truckload. So you saw a lot of that. The electric companies do it where they help each other. Then there's all these private companies that just marshal people and, show up and, offer to do remediation services and things like that. Now, that's where things get a little hairy because, one of the major issues that we're dealing with at this phase of the hurricane are, condos primarily who feel like they were, ripped off or taken advantage of with the remediation bills, because, a lot of them will come in and say, well, we'll only take what what your insurance is, and you're desperate. And, you're looking at, literally something like somebody threw a bomb in there. And, the natural inclination is, that sounds good. But I've seen one bill for remediation over $10 million. They're all millions, 1.7, 2.4, 3.6. In Sanibel, for example, they had to come out by boat. They had to bring generators. So it's not like they didn't do anything, but when you look at the numbers and say, well, where did this number come from? That's where, it gets, interesting. We saw one where we said, we're not going to pay you until we get, time and materials chart. And they had extension cords that like 50-foot extension cord you could buy at Home Depot for $30. They rented them for $60 a day for 5 months. So it's like buying an aspirin in a hospital, I guess. You should probably, just get your own. And then the problem, of course, is, well, you say, you said they're only going to charge us what, our insurance limits are. Well, insurance, you need to rebuild it, not just remediate it. And if you've got $6 million in insurance and you burn 4 of it on remediation, you're not going to be able to rebuild your place. So, it has been, really, a privilege for me to, be here to help my clients, when they ask, to, try to anticipate, these issues for them and try to protect and help them, because there's a lot of good people here to help. There's bad people here that try to take advantage.
I'm sitting here thinking, again, it's one thing when you're not dealing with your own personal tragedy, trying to rebuild your home, dealing with your family members who've been impacted. But I said in the intro, you've represented more than 1,000 communities in Southwest Florida. Many of them suffered significant damage. How did you juggle that? Everything you talked about, the assignment of benefits contracts. We've talked for years with our clients telling them, hey, make sure you don't throw out the normal vetting process. You take the steps you need to take to mitigate further damage, to make the building waterproof and watertight. But, certainly you want to make sure that you're still taking the steps to make sure you're doing business with a reputable contractor. How did you juggle all that? And this applies to our other partners in the area who are also dealing with this.
Well, one of the benefits of being with a large firm like Becker is that, we have a deep bench. And in today's world, unlike, 20 years ago, where that person's, hat was being hung really doesn't mean very much at all. Keep in mind with our clients, none of them were there. They all, their properties were wrecked. They, most of them fled to their other homes or hotels or friends or, whatever. First thing that we did was we put together, what I dubbed the Eon Triage Group. And we had about 30 lawyers. And, literally for a month, all I did was play traffic cop, which was to see every inquiry that came in, found somebody in the group that, was available to handle that, and then just kind of rode their butt and made sure it got handled. And, everybody stepped up. I mean, our clients all got, very immediate and Becker service. And that was really an eye-opener for me, because sometimes you think, is it better to just kind of do your own thing and be your own guy, or is it part be big, a smaller cog in a bigger wheel? If I was a sole practitioner and, as you mentioned, having to deal with all my own personal issues, including not having any electricity, any cell phone service or a home, what would I couldn't have done it. And so we're very fortunate in that regard.
Are any of your clients, your condo clients, considering termination at this point after Ian?
A few. We're not at that stage yet. Here's what the biggest issue is going to become. Under the local regulations in every jurisdiction, and in Lee County, I think we have 6 or 7 municipalities in the county, they have build back regulations which are required by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And the reason they're required is that if you don't follow FEMA regulations, then your county does not qualify, or your municipality does not qualify for federal flood insurance, or they raise the rates substantially. So basically every one of these municipalities have to comply in their build back regulations with FEMA guidelines so people can get flood insurance or affordable flood insurance. The basic rule is that if you have more than 50% of the building's value in damage, you have to build it back to new flood elevation. So virtually take Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach. Virtually every condo is built at beach level. These were all built 70s, 80s, 90s. And the first floor unit, which is a desirable unit, you basically step out onto the beach. And the NGVD there, as it's called, the geo-vertical datum line or whatever, but the height above sea level, it's 3-4 feet. You're on the beach. And the current flood elevation, depends on where you go, is anywhere between 12 and 16 feet now. So if over 50% of the value of your building is going to have to be spent to build it back, you have to build it back at flood elevation, which means the first floor now needs to go from 3 feet above sea level to 12 or 16 feet above sea level.
Let me stop you there. That's a good thing, because we had 2 University of Miami professors on. They say it's going to be 6 feet of sea level rise by 2050.
Maybe. But, the question is, how do you raise up the first floor living unit of a 9-story building? You can't.
You have to knock the building up. Yeah.
So you have to tear it down. You have to terminate it. Then is the highest and best use building back another building. You get into issues of title. Even if if you can rebuild. Well, I used to own airspace that started at 3 feet above sea level and ended at 11 feet above sea level. So now you want to put me at, between 12 feet and 20 feet for my fee ownership, but the guy on the 3rd floor owns that already. So I mean, it's really kind of mind-boggling. And the question is, it's beachfront property, but there's a coastal construction setback line that may, impact future, buildability on it. So, these issues are relatively mind-numbing. You just got to take them one at a time, one step at a time. The overwhelming bias, if you want to use that word, or a desired result for my clients is rebuilding. And, we've had very good cooperation from all the local municipalities, primarily the city of Sanibel, the town of Fort Myers Beach, and unincorporated Lee County, which are the 3, kind of hardest hit municipalities, in dealing with that particular aspect of it. The problem is, the insurance companies are sitting on their money. I mean, it's kind of reached, crisis level in my opinion. I haven't sat down and counted them, but I'm going to guess in our office, we have somewhere on the order of between a 75, maybe 100, maybe 65, but, pushing 100 clients with insurance claims in excess of $5 million quite a few.
5 million each.
Yeah, we have 20 or 30 with claims of 20 to 30 million each. We have a couple of clients with claims over 50 million. So, I mean, these are huge claims, and the system is overstressed to begin with. I mean, you think about, $100 billion loss, and these companies still have to pay when, some guys in Ohio's house burns down. They still got to deal with that, but they've got all of this to deal with. And they subcontract everything, adjusters, inspectors, et cetera. And, I can tell you, I mean, it's 8 months after the storm. To my knowledge, we do not have one client, nor have I heard of any other association, no matter who represents them, with substantial damage having settled their claim or even being close to it. You get into this kind of vortex of, well, yes, we want to rebuild, but we don't know how much money we're going to get. We may have to spend $8 million. Well, we put in a claim for $8 million. What if we only get 3? What do we do then? I kind of look at these storms in phases, and I think we've kind of reached what I call phase 3. Phase 1 is just basically emergency response and remediation. All the remediators are there. They got the guys there. They're doing the work. Everybody's happy. Wow, this looks great. Phase 2 is the remediation bills come in and people say, oh, snap, look at this. And they also start dealing with the reality of, reconstruction. A lot of people, in my opinion, make the mistake that to be the first one done is, means you're doing the best. Haste makes waste. I've told clients that. And the enormity of this loss, in my opinion, most condos are going to be a 2-year build back. Really bad ones are probably going to be 3+. And, we'll be at a year in 4 months. And I still have a significant number of clients in Sanibel don't even have electricity yet.
And let's talk about that. So another, at least several months to well over a year to build back. In the interim, they're going to need to renew their insurance coverage. So let's talk about how difficult it's going to be for them to get decent coverage, at a premium they can afford.
So it's basically the worst insurance crisis ever. And this was not caused by Ian, although Ian may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. This has been building up for a long time. Number one, the property insurers hate Florida condos because of water leaks. I mean, you pay a $90,000 policy, and then they end up paying $120,000 on these, what they see as these BS hot water heater leak cases. And, they collected, they paid more than they collected in the premium. Nothing catastrophic, but, they add up, and you've got this kind of cottage industry of these certain HO6 carriers filing subrogation claims and all of that. So, this nickel and dime stuff, basically eats up their premium. So why do it? I mean, you're writing a huge risk for free. So the water leak thing has, a lot of these are, $50,000, $60,000 cases. Your ice maker breaks upstairs, you're away in Disney World for the weekend. And by the time you get back, I've got, 4,000 gallons of water. My ceiling collapses, there's mold, blah, blah. The story. I mean, it's a $60,000, $70,000 deal. And it's no fault insurance. So the master property policy has to pay for a lot of that. And, high rises have these constantly. So that's been a long standing issue that they've had with this market. Secondly, and this is well above my pay grade, but my friends who are smarter than me and do this tell me that there's kind of a crisis in what they call the reinsurance market. When you buy insurance for $30 million from State Farm, State Farm doesn't take $30 million out of its account if there is a loss. They reinsure through like Zurich and Lloyd's of London and the Middle East and all these huge reinsurers. And the reinsurers have what are called rate tariffs that are regulated by the state. So there's got to be, the right formula for that to be attractive to them. So my understanding is that whole thing has not been conducive to the reinsurers wanting to write in Florida because they're buying the big risks. They're buying the catastrophic stuff. Third, we had Surfside. That was another biblical event. 100 people dead, billion-dollar claim. And basically every insurance company within, a mile of the place got sued. So, so you take all of those things and add them up and then throw Ian on top of that. It is going to get worse from what, I have been told by my friends in the business. There was some hope that the legislature, whose session ended earlier this month, would do something. They didn't.
They seem to think that, all of the problems you just laid out were not mentioned. What was laid out, other than the HO6 and the subrogation claims, that it's terrible attorneys that are suing. And
that's right. What they've done is the only thing they really did was made it harder for policyholders to make claims under their policies. Now, are there bus stop, bench advertising lawyers that are in this? Yes, of course. They're in all of that. But I think that this will help the insurance companies increase their profits. In my prediction, it will have zero impact on their willingness to write or their rates. I think it's impacted by much larger things. To wit, this law was passed and signed, and I just had a client call today. They can't get any insurance. They went to 28 carriers, and nobody will write them. And the only policy they were able to get was with their current carrier. I'm dealing with one right now, I think, is a typical story that we'll be seeing. I have a client, it's a beachfront, high rise, I guess, maybe 10 stories, something. And their assured value was $25 million for wind. And they had $25 million worth of insurance. State law requires replacement costs. That's how adequate insurance is defined, less a reasonable deductible. So their policy expired in April, I guess. And their broker, a large national broker, you know the name, went to 28 companies. Nobody would write them except their incumbent carrier. And their incumbent carrier would only give them insurance for $5 million. Now it's a $20 million exposure and with a $2 million deductible. So basically on a $20 million exposure, the only insurance this client could get was $5 million with a $2 million deductible, so $3 million. So the building is basically insured for 1/7 of its value. That doesn't meet the statute, but the board has used its best efforts. More sickening yet is the policy they had last year for the $25 million with the 5% deductible. The premium was $100,000 plus or minus for that. This new policy they have for $3 million is $300,000. So they are paying 3 times the amount for 1/12 of the coverage. And they went to 28 insurance companies.
so what do you say when they say, as I'm getting these calls, I'm fielding these calls every week, is we want to self-insure. And then we're going to go to everybody, especially in the smaller communities. I had one, it was 28 units. Everybody agrees, just the nightmare you laid out. We're paying quadruple for inadequate coverage. We want to go bare. We're going to self-insure. What do you say to a client who says that?
Yeah, I mean, I tell them self-insurance is not a thing because you're not self-insuring, you're going bare. You're not getting insurance and you're violating the statute. If you want self-insurance, there's a procedure in the statute where you basically have to go through an OIR, Office of Insurance Regulation, approval process. This was written after the last insurance crisis by, Berkshire Hathaway or one of the big boys who were going to try to roll out a product. Nobody could. And I've never heard of it being done. And I'm around this like you are every day, all day. It's not a thing. And so, if the association can get insurance, in my opinion, it has to buy it. I would never sit on a board where, they did not have, where the association did not have whatever insurance, the law, what the market allows them to get, regardless of the cost. To me, even if 100% of the owners agree, well, that may have stopped them, but what about the guy that buys tomorrow? Or What about mortgage companies? Or what about disclosure obligations when you go to sell your unit? Do I have to tell you that you're buying an asset that's uninsured? I mean, look, it's a terrible situation, but, when there is insurance available, going bare only, makes it worse. Now, if a client can't get insurance, the law doesn't require you to do the impossible. I mean, in the example I gave, they went to one of the largest agent brokers in the world, and they went to 28 carriers from around the world, and they couldn't get it. So what else can you do? Nothing. You got to tell your owner. So they may be in default to their mortgages, which require them to have insurance. So, I mean, I think what's going to happen, or at least I hope what's going to happen, is that this will start becoming enough of a concern that the right people get a hold of the right legislators and that it be addressed.
I can't believe our legislature is focusing on many things other than this.
It's timing, because we're kind of, I said, at the tip of the spear. I mean, because I'm in probably the most fertile market for this to be a problem because we have the most damage. I think the remedy is going to have to lie through citizens, which you'll recall back in the 2000s, they called it the JUA, the Joint Underwriting Association. That all started kind of because of the same stuff, because after Andrew and all of that, and then after the 04, 05 hurricanes, insurers get spooked. So there was a state-sponsored insurance program called the JUA, the Joint Underwriting Association, which eventually morphed into Citizens. The problem with Citizens is twofold. Number one, by statute, if your condominium allows rentals of less than 30 days more than 8 times a year, and over half the units are rented on a transient basis, you're ineligible statutorily for Citizens. So, in this region, Fort Myers and Beach and Sanibel, a lot of these are transient rental condos. They do weekly rentals, and they are not compliant with Citizens. They're not eligible. I also have a lot of clients in Naples that don't allow short-term rentals. They have a 30-day minimum. The problem they're having is that Citizens apparently has a guideline, and I find this interesting. Their guidelines are not a matter of public record, although I thought they were a public company. They're only given to their agents, and their agents are told they're proprietary. So I've never seen them, and I've been told you can't get them. I mean, maybe I have to do a Freedom of Information Act search or something, but basically the position that Citizens is taking on damaged property is that you have to show that it's reasonably likely that it will be back pretty much the way it was before the storm within 90 days, or they're not going to write you. Well, most of my clients, like I said, are looking at, a year plus. So, Citizens is, rejecting them. So in the example, I gave you earlier about the client who's paying 3 times more for 12% of the coverage, they actually don't allow short-term rentals. They would be Citizens eligible on their rental policy, but Citizens said, you got too much damage. We're not insuring it. So, if the government won't insure it, who the hell will? I mean, so I think that is where the legislature really needs to be educated and may even need to call a special session, because this is going to go from bad to worse, in my opinion.
Citizens has a third problem. It's a branding problem. So I asked you about going bare. Not only I'm getting this in stereo because I get it with the clients. My parents, who are elderly and single family homeowners out in Weston, Florida, had a conversation with them. Their home is free and clear. My dad just decided he's not paying the windstorm coverage, too much. And so we got him a quote through Citizens, and my mom says, no, Citizens is bad. Well, what's bad about it? It's a brand. It's a perception. No, it's bad. So I'm dealing with the pushback on an asset that's probably a $700,000 asset. And my parents have the ability to say, we're just not going to pay for it, and we're going to cross our fingers and hope we don't get a tornado or a hit. But in a multifamily building, don't have that same.
I wouldn't
luxury.
go spending your inheritance yet, then, if I were you.
I'm going to pay it, Joe, to protect my inheritance. But,
yeah, well, look, whatever. I mean, that you would not believe what I pay for my house in insurance, and because my home is elevated. I mean, I had I had about $250,000 worth of flood damage, and I got $40,000 in coverage. And that's all I'm going to get. I mean, look, I took the risk, but wind damage, I also had a lot of wind damage. You live in Florida, you've got to understand your risks and insure what you can, and it ain't cheap.
Did all your clients have flood coverage?
Yes, I don't know of any that didn't. And, flood has been very good to deal with. I guess they're spending the government's money, so
Right.
What's the diff, right? But yeah, I mean, the flood has actually been, kind of a savior in some of these because the policies are capped by law at $250,000 a unit. But if you have a 10-story building with 10 units of floor, that's 100 units, you got 25 million in flood damage. Well, only the first floor is really getting damaged by flood, and all the electrical systems, maybe the second floor and some of the Sanibel condos where the waves are rolling in at 15 feet. But the higher your building, the more money you get because it's per unit, and then there's plenty of flood money, to fix it. So that's actually been a positive thing in some respects. The problem with flood is it doesn't cover a lot of exterior things. It doesn't cover swimming pools, fences, docks, that kind of thing, landscape. So yes, I mean, I would say all of my clients that I've been dealing with have flood insurance, and they're all pretty damn glad they do.
So you've been a community association attorney for more than 4 decades. You've been involved in a lot of policy groups dedicated to the industry. I know it's hard to like condense it to one suggestion, but what's the one thing you wish boards would do that they rarely do?
Get professional advice judiciously. I'm sure you do. I have a lot of clients that they're calling me over, kind of fighting with people over things that are personality things. And, that's part of it, but that's kind of a waste. Look, we all like to save money, and we don't like to make ourselves consultant poor or buy things where we don't really get something. I mean, if I spend, $5,000, I would like to have, a new, whatever, a nice wristwatch or you name it. But where I've found clients make the biggest errors, and I'm seeing this a lot right now, is not getting proper professional advice in advance. And before, people think that's self-serving. You're a lawyer. You want them to call you. I'm not talking about legal advice as much as I'm talking about technical advice. Clients do not seem to be willing or educated enough's the right word, or aware of the need to have engineers involved in the preservation of the superstructure of these assets. I mean, even if you are, most of our board members aren't engineers, they're not lawyers, they're not accountants, but even if they are, they're not specialized in these areas. So, there's nothing wrong with having, say, a retired lawyer on the board. Good. You have an educated client, but you don't have a substitute for somebody that does this for a living. Same with engineers. People say, oh, I was in construction in Ohio for 40 years. I know enough. Well, guy built roads. Good, good. I'm sure he was great at it. He made a lot of money at it, but, it's what does he know about concrete's falling? And, I see so many clients, they're spending $2.5 million on new roofs. I said, well, where's the engineering specs? Well, we just had the contractor draw them up. Well, if you go to the farmer and buy a load of manure, you're going to get a load of manure, and don't complain when you find out later it's manure. And when you go to a contractor, they have no duty to you. I mean, it's caveat emptor, let the buyer beware.
Well, they're selling.
So I would say the biggest mistake I see with clients is in substantial property maintenance transactions, and I would certainly consider anything 6 figures or higher to be substantial, not having the appropriate qualified engineer, advise them that what they should be getting and that they're getting what they pay for. We have a whole group of construction lawyers who work like dogs. And if most of our clients did that, we wouldn't need them, because, that's one of the biggest causes. And I'm seeing this in Ian, because everybody's in a hurry to be the first. Oh my gosh, the next door neighbors have their drywall in and we don't. We must be bad. We must be stupid. Well, whatever. Fastest isn't always the best. So, if I had one thing that I would encourage clients to do better is to be thoughtful about when you're doing something, who knows more about it than you do, and who can help you discharge your fiduciary duty and protect you from liability. And if it's building stuff, it's an engineer. If it's law stuff, it's a lawyer. If it's, accounting stuff, it's an accountant. The other thing is, I feel that, and I've seen this for 4 decades. Boards put a lot of pressure on their managers to practice in these disciplines that they're not qualified for or licensed in. And every manager will tell you that they don't want to be doing this. They don't need the liability. They don't claim to have the knowledge. Of course, they know something about law. They know something about accounting. They know something about engineering. They have to. It's part of their job is to work with all of these disciplines. I have a few clients that, they'll come to me with a problem and say, our manager advised us we should do this. Well, it was wrong. And I'll talk to the manager, no lies. He was like, what's up here, dude? I was like, well, they kind of made me at the meeting. And I said, you should talk to the lawyer. And I didn't want to spend the money. So, yeah, it's really important to kind of stay in your lane. And the board member's lane is to, set the policy with the input of the people that you need input from.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. And I would say for me, I'd like boards to push back against the we've always done it this way mindset, particularly in communities that are 40, 50, 60 years old. It's a different landscape today. Everything we've been talking about. You mentioned Surfside. There was a time not so long ago that when somebody was renovating, completely gutting their unit, the only thing most boards, would consider is the contractor licensed and insured. That was it. Not looking at the plans, not looking if there was going to be any drilling into the slab, any use of X-ray technology, things like that. So when I come across boards and it's always, hey, we've always done it this way. Well, the legal landscape has changed. The liability landscape has changed. Insurance certainly has changed. So in my opinion, I think they need to have more of a growth mindset than a fixed mindset.
It's going to get worse. I read something, I believe it's true, I wouldn't swear to it, that there were more lawyers admitted to practice in the last 30 years in the United States than collectively existed in the 200-year history of the country prior to that. And look, I get demand letters every day from, this used to be a small town. I knew every lawyer. And, I kind of knew the good, bad, and ugly about them, and they did about me. I get these letters like, who the heck is this? Look it up, and, somebody's been, admitted for, 6 months, and, they're out ready to take you to court. And so, the society is, I think becoming, more litigious. I think you've got to be, more self-protective. I think the insurance companies are shrinking what they're willing to cover because of some of the reasons we've discussed. And I think it's really, surprising to me how, people from the older generation, and I count myself among that. Today's my 64th birthday, by the way.
Oh, happy birthday. Today's your actual birthday. Happy birthday.
64. I'll be ready for Medicare next year. So
I think the Beatles wrote a song.
Yeah, but what I've really seen and certainly taken some satisfaction out is most of my clients are older than me. Retirees, and the way they've embraced technology, Zoom and, all of those things. I don't know if the pandemic just forced us to have to, accept it, but, people really like it and are taking advantage of it. Electronic online voting, remote participation. And, I used to meet with, I probably used to have 10 or 12 meetings in my office a week. I probably have 15 or 20 a year now. I still have 10 or 12 a week, but they're all by Zoom. That's what the clients want. They're just as happy to, be at their, kitchen table with their cup of coffee and their gym shorts than,
why not? Yeah.
Lawyer's office. So, things are changing. And I think, for the better, the technology has really made the operation of associations easier. But It doesn't take the personalities out of personality. I mean, one thing that I've seen, the West Coast has always kind of been looked at as, Ohio on the Gulf, Midwesterners don't really get too worked up about anything. But, I think you see it on Facebook and, on the news. I mean, people seem to be getting a little nastier these days. Things get a little more polarized. People, sometimes approach problems by attacking the person they see as disagreeing or being contrary to their interests. When you're dealing with volunteer board members who already are putting in time and that's the first interaction they have with you, that's not going to turn out well. I mean, so I guess we'll always have jobs.
You said you liked the embracing of technology by the older generation. Do you fear that you and I and our colleagues are going to ever be replaced by Chat GPT or other forms of artificial intelligence?
No, because this is not an easy area to practice law in. Can't be a one-trick pony and do this kind of work because, first of all, while people kind of, you see all the, the Karen jokes and the Saturday Night Live skits and all that, and that's part of it, and I can laugh at that, but it's actually a relatively complex area of practice because you have to have more than passing knowledge of several fields of law, including real estate, including corporate law, including tort, personal liability, personal injury law, and administrative law, employment law. I mean, in your average day, you'll deal with every one of those issues. And clients don't want to hear, well, I got to research it and get back to you. So you take that, and then you take, one of the most lengthy and complex sets of statutes in 718 and 719 and 720, and all the administrative rules are probably 150, 200 pages put together, and all the details in them. And, and then 60 years worth of case law, interpreting all that stuff. I mean, that is a fairly formidable set of laws to have to be, a master of kind of off the top of your head. Yeah. Then you have to explain that to people who might be the retired CEO of Target or, a retired, blue collar worker or everywhere in between. So you take all your clients like you can. So it's not easy. And I don't see a robot doing it. To me, if you don't have good people skills, you're not going to be able to, be successful in this. And I'm not saying that in a, self-congratulatory way, like I'm the greatest guy in the world, but you got to be able to communicate with people at a level that they are comfortable with. And sometimes you have to be able to be a chameleon because a level that one person may be comfortable with, another may not. You got to kind of be able to perceive that and, adjust to that. I mean, I have clients who are, retired lawyers, and I know when I talk to them, they're going to want me to cite cases and stuff like that. Most of my clients, if I cite a case, they're going to start looking at their watch and saying, why are we here? It is a difficult, and, to me, the most frustrating part of it is because it isn't like becoming, Microsoft's lawyer. It's easy to find a condo association that will hire you. You know what I mean? I mean, just tell them you're cheaper than everybody else and someone will hire you. So it's relatively easy to get into the field at some level and to say that's what you do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I have noticed that there is some, starting from the perception, this isn't easy. This is hard. And starting with that perception, I've seen, some efforts to commoditize it and kind of dumb it down. I actually go a different way when I go shopping, so my blood pressure doesn't go up. But there is a billboard for some law firm that's not from around here that says, condo and HOA law discount. We charge up to 70% off. We do doc rewrites for $2,000.
That's in your market? There's a billboard that says that?
Yes, I'll send you a picture of it. But I don't drive by there because my blood pressure goes kind of to the level where my doctor would get upset. But I mean, it's really, to me, it's kind of a a disservice to, what lawyering, lawyering is a noble profession. It gets maligned because a lot of people do things that deserve that to happen. But, to do it right, you got to be smart, you got to be ethical, and you got to work hard. And you got to care about your clients. And if you do all those things, you're going to be a good lawyer, and you deserve to be compensated for it, well compensated for it. So I think that one of the things that may discourage some people is there's some tendency to say, well, this is kind of, what JV lawyers do because it's not real law, because there are schlocks who do it. Sorry to say. But I think if you look at, the people that have really made a name for themselves in this field, the Michael Gelfands, the Bill Sklars, of the world, these are top-notch lawyers and would be considered that in any field. And, it's really important to me, in my last years of practice, according to my financial planner, I can retire when I'm 94, to try to do that. And I have had the privilege of, mentoring quite a few lawyers in my career. And some of them are, very good lawyers who, have and will continue to make a mark. So, like I said, it is it's a difficult field because I bring in new lawyers and, you bring them into litigation or something. Well, you can go do a document production, sit there with 10 boxes for 20 hours. Anybody can do that. You got to know what you're doing, but, you can hit the ground running. In this field, it takes probably 2 years to just basically learn the basic laws where you can sit there in a room and be confident that you're giving the right answer. So a lot of people don't have the patience for that.
I was going to say tenacity. You have to stick with it. If you stick with it long enough.
Sort of a firm that doesn't demand like you're billing a lot of money immediately, because you're not going to be able to do that. That's one of the great things about this firm is when we have somebody that, wants to do this as their career, we support them through their formative years and make them strong lawyers. And, this area of law will provide a really, stable economic opportunity for anybody that wants to practice in it and do it the right way, in my opinion. Well, it never is boring, that I'll say for sure. But I started out my career in dual litigation. I started as a public defender. I tried murder cases. I just hated that because it was just always fighting. And at the end of the day, the consequences were disastrous for somebody. And the same with big stakes litigation. I see myself as a problem solver. That's what I do all day is help people solve problems, because most people want to work together to solve their problems. And if you can find a way, to help them get there, that's satisfying. And it's also something that, is a sought after skill. People like that. And I'm doing a lot of that now with, these hurricane things. There's millions of dollars and people have, very significant investments, and they're all worried and upset. And, be able to kind of be a voice of calm and say, I know the law, I helped write the law, this is how the law works, this is what your board's going to face. And, it may not be fast, it may not be pretty, it may cost you something, but at least they get it. And, to me, that's very satisfying to be able to do that. So I've been very fortunate.
Listen, you have created a career in this industry that's worthy of note, worthy of all the honors, and worthy of emulating. I do want to thank you for joining us. And I want to end on one note. This episode was about surviving a disastrous Hurricane Ian. But you've also been hit by lightning twice, Joe. You've been hit by lightning twice and now survived one of the most catastrophic hurricanes. What is your secret?
Well, my wife says I have 9 lives and I might be on the 8th one. I don't know if you go to my Facebook but read my story of Hank the horse. I actually took a tumble off a cliff while elk hunting in the Teton Mountains near Jackson Hole in 2017. My horse fell over and we went down a very long cliff together, and I ended up getting a concussion and my horse almost rolled over me and hit me in the head. So that was probably actually my nearest death experience.
This is from a man who's been hit by lightning twice.
I've also had 2 pulmonary embolisms, and I was in a 20-car pileup on I-75. So I think if you add those up, I'm still at 7, so I got a couple left.
I want to know your secret. And I also don't want to hang out with you. Thanks for being here.
All right. Take care, guys. Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.